Kristian Tharaldson, Great Northern Granite in Bloomington, Minnesota. I am the operations manager. Probably 2013, I think, the very beginning of 2013. I came on in 2012, and everything was done on paper. It was a paper calendar. It was just a billboard or a cork board, and then it had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on there. And then just these little pieces of paper with the job address and what the material was going to that job address. So then we moved everything to like Google Calendar and tried to actually color code everything, and then realized that Moraware was basically a better version of that. When we switched to Moraware was when everything changed for the company. I was the 9th person hired. And my boss and I used to sit in his office and bid everything by hand. So we just always had our calculators out and our rulers and whatever blueprints we had. And we would bid everything. We could usually crank out 5 to 10 bids a day, depending on if we had full house or whatever. And then when we switched to Moraware, we made a pretty quick count pretty quickly. We kind of always had 120 active bids going at a time, and that's when everything changed. We usually fluctuate between like 37 and 42 employees, and we have 2 locations. And it got to a point where Amy, who's our lead estimator, who all she does is bid all day long, like 2 summers ago, we were so busy that it almost collapsed our company because there was just so much work and it was so hard to keep up with. She was averaging, I think she did like 95 bids in one day. And she was averaging, I think, like 76 bids a day that entire summer. If you don't have Moraware, you can't do that at all. And one of our guarantees at Great Northern Granite is a 24 turnaround on your bid. Really what we did was just focus on the price list to get all of that right. We've changed our bidding style a little bit now, but because we're an importer, we carry our own stone. That was basically the one thing that separated us from everybody else in Minnesota, was that we would import. It's a messy process to bring material in, but if you can figure it out and do it well, you can make so much more money by cutting out that middleman. And when you have your own stock, you don't have to charge by the slab for a lot of like the commodity stones. So figuring out how we were going to be pricing by the square foot and what our ultimately what we wanted our pricing structure to be within Moraware was probably the longest part. And there's a point in CounterGo where you get around like if you have a kitchen that's coming out around like 5,000, 5,500, the numbers start to skew just a little bit if you're looking at like liability. So, like the way we look at it is we always want to make sure that the stone is covered. If something should happen, if it blows up on the saw or, something happens, you have enough money there to cover getting more material in. That's kind of how we were pricing at that time. So getting that pricing structure together probably took the most amount of time. But once we realized that it was locked in, and that was probably after just a week or 2, it was like a rocket ship. Like there wasn't really anything slow about it. There was a few things, like I remember asking Harry if we could duplicate sinks, and they figured out how we could duplicate sinks, and that sped things up really quickly. Especially when you're doing like multiple room houses and there's just bathroom sinks everywhere. That really speeds up the process. Finding those little things that took, shaving seconds off of the process, put us in a position where we could really just crank out bids. So I think what I referenced it to was the difference between having a Rolodex and having a cell phone with all your contact information. You know what I mean? Like, you just know, I want to talk to this person, you call that person. You don't have to sit there and spin and, you know, try and find that one card with that person's number. You could, it's like, you know, just putting in the first couple letters of a name, and everything that you have is, everything that you need is there. And that was how I, at the time, was referring to going from a Rolodex to a cell. Honestly, the ability to just draw whatever comes our way. There are very few instances where it's like, okay, we can't draw that in here. So just the drawing tool itself, being able to just draw whatever, because a lot of these luxury homes, we get a lot of architects that are like coming up with this crazy stuff. And they're like, well, this is how I drew it. And, you know, there are ways to bid things accurately, and there are ways to bid things inaccurately. And that drawing tool, I mean, compared to basically everything else that we've ever tried, is far more accurate and quicker than everything else. So there's a way to create countertops through kind of like reverse clipping, if you will. Like, it's almost just counterintuitive to, not clipping, sorry, notching. So like, you can put notches in, but you can also use that notch tool to create bump outs that wouldn't normally be there. I don't know if I'm getting too technical there, but there's just certain instances where countertops have to wrap around walls, and you can kind of reverse engineer the notch tool to make what you can't make with the bump out tool, if that makes sense. Yeah, if you're a smaller business starting out, it can seriously propel you. If you have trouble keeping things in order, it's a great tool to, you know, really start that process of keeping the information in one spot. And, you know, I come from a company that when I got there, everything was on paper, and everyone was so used to that and didn't want to really get away from it, because it's almost like a personal feel. That's my calendar. This is my job. These are my files. And it got to the point where one of my bosses, we actually threw his paper calendar in the drop ceiling so he couldn't find it, and he was forced to use Moraware, which was, you know, another breaking point for our company, which was really good. But it just kind of, it helps build that team aspect that, you know, people can go in and access any information that they might need to. They don't have to stop somebody else from doing what they're doing. They don't have to interrupt anybody to get information. It just it's a really good compiler to have the whole company involved. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, was people felt, I think, more as a team and more involved in all the projects and not just what was sitting in front of them. And I guess making them more aware of what's going on in the company. But it was definitely it definitely created unity between sales, between fabrication, between install. Just kind of, it was this central location for all of our information for everyone to be able to see and continue their work.